Well, I've been wanting to do this more than I've been doing it, but at all is better than not at all, so that's good. It's cold here right now. My heater broke last night, and I live in the Rocky Mountains, and it is January, so I have a small auxiliary heater that's been able to help me out. You might be able to hear it in the background, but it unfortunately is kind of terrible. So it is cold here. Fortunately, I do like wool and have invested in that, which is very helpful. But today I was writing, and I started on this paper. It was about loneliness, and I've done some thinking about this and had some experience with it. And I started to put pen to paper, which, by the way, I've been doing a lot of writing recently. I'll probably put like a little link to the website so you can see some of my articles. I have a whole bunch ready to be published that will be published because I'm trying to get like one a week. But anyway, I was working on one of those. It's about loneliness. I was writing it out and just felt myself being very bitter. So I kept writing, and this bitterness, the sense of being jaded, sense of unfairness was looming over me. So I kept writing and I kept writing, and it was getting to be quite a long paper. I mean, I was many thousands of words in before I just looked up and said, this paper is absolutely awful. One, I don't think that my writing is going to be particularly helped by my being angry. You know, I'm going to be offset and not be able to be as objective on things, and that's exactly what happened. The things that I thought were the cause of my feeling jaded ended up getting an unfair attack and whatnot, and there was definitely some lack of objectivity. One thing that I attempt to do is be able to see outside of myself a little bit, and then at least be aware of what's going on with myself, cognitively speaking. And it didn't seem this writing was doing that at all. It was very didactic, one-sided, very, this is how I feel. And it didn't encapsulate, I think it encapsulated a lot of the human experience, but it didn't encapsulate a fair and complete picture. So if anything, a honest reader would be in this position of being bitter and considering things from one point of view. Think of it like reading a political piece from one specific party or from a entity that sides with one particular party. It's not going to be very good at critiquing itself. It's going to primarily be picking apart other people's ideas, and it's not going to be very self-aware. It was that type of writing. I got to the end and I realized I had wasted a number of hours, and I could have used a win because, you know, you have bad days and sometimes you have a whole bunch of them in a row. So I was stuck in this position where I was hoping this article would go well. I'd be able to say something meaningful, and then I'd go, oh, well, here's something powerful, something empowering, something beautiful, something substantive that people can walk away with to make their lives better. And the article didn't do that. It just kind of got worse and more bitter and jaded and debauched until finally I just put the paper down. I think the topic is something I want to cover later, and hopefully I'll be able to do right at that point. But that topic today was a bad combination. And then I spent the next couple hours being bitter. I don't think that's a terribly new thing for us humans to grapple with. Everybody thinks they have a pretty good reason for their bitterness, a nice little excuse of why the chip's on their shoulder and the world's out to get them. And they can tell you that story, and they've recited it, and that story's important to them, because if they don't have that story, they have to start taking responsibility for a ton of things, and it can get hard real fast. But to be fair to them, and to look from their perspective, yeah, you have a whole bunch of things happen over and over again that are immensely painful, that take away things that you would have liked to happen, and your efforts end up in vain, and the things that you finally do build that go well fall apart. Yeah, I could see how that could end in bitterness. I recently finished a paper on gratitude, which I think is one of the most vital things that I can talk about. But I point out how, according to a lot of studies, there's this idea that the loss of something is 2.5 to 3 times more powerful than the gain of it. So if I were to give you something, you'd be 100%, let's say 100 measurements of happy, and then if it would be stolen or broken, you'd be 200 to 300 measurements of sad. If we can be in a economist for a second and measure happiness as a metric in utils or something, but this is a problem, because life is this constant flow and exchange of values where you gain something, you lose something, something comes and something goes. It's this flow that I think a lot of ancient traditions were acutely aware of and were able to kind of respond to that well in terms of like the human experience. But it is painful because something comes, something goes, and the going is harder than it arriving in your life, and that can really eat you up because it's just like a barrage of fists. And what I suggest with gratitude is we can only do so much to mitigate the suffering from losing something. When someone passes away, when an object that we appreciate inevitably breaks down, when our young bodies crumble from underneath us, that's something that we're always trying as humans to try to make that meaningful and deal with that pain. But I think the other side that we can really focus on is on the first side, trying to make something beautiful and acknowledge its properties of value while we have it. The classic conversation, and I've definitely argued with my friends about this quite a bit, is is it better to have loved and to have lost, or to never loved at all? And honestly, I wish that I could have a better case for that than I do, but I don't. But what I have found is that when I have something, and like I suspect, like everything else, it's going to fall apart, leave me, something's going to not work out, which is not special to me. That's a very natural occurrence in the human experience. Well, what I can do today is maybe to realize it is as good as it is. Or maybe even try to read it as being better than it is. The time's going to come that everything that I have will fall apart, and if it doesn't, then I'm going to. One of us is going to go first. So whether it's mourning everything at once or mourning it one by one, there will be mourning. And that doesn't sound particularly fun. I can think of like this guitar right here. I really appreciate it. It's a pretty instrument. It served me well. I have some fun stories with it. But one day, it's going to be broken, lost, stolen, kind of like where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. And it's going to be gone forever. And it's going to be a very permanent goodbye that I'm going to have with this thing that mattered very much to me. And I'm going to mourn in that day. Oh, I missed that guitar. It was such a nice little guitar. I liked the way that it fretted, played a nice clean note. However, I think I'll be consoled then by the fact that I have made an earnest and honest attempt to really be with and be grateful for and enjoy it while I had it. And that's the case the paper makes, is I'm never going to discredit suffering. In fact, sometimes I think that things are even worse than we think they are. However, skepticism and an epistemological look at the nature of something and whether or not it is the case is a two-edged sword. And if we're looking at value and we're looking at meaning, it can't just be this one-sided, like, yeah, everything ought to get us and we're screwed. Well, there's sort of this level of maximum terribleness that life can come to. For example, if you're in enough pain, you'll just die. Like, you can't be in infinite amounts of pain. And if you go without too many things, you won't subsist across time. So there's this nice balance of how bad things can get. You can only get so hungry, so cold, so lonely. There's a maximum level to these things that are inherent in something pretty basic in reality. So, but even if we were like to get really close to maxing those things out, we're in this position where the fact that we are still existing is something to be grateful about. So we talk about sort of like a hierarchy of where to start. You know, we start with the physical. I'm grateful for my home and for a nice warm piece of clothing, for food. And then we go maybe to something like experiences. I'm grateful for education and friendships and trips and stuff and memories. And then we get to the social. I'm grateful for my family and the people that I love. And I guess friendships would probably be more appropriate there. And then we get to the most properly basic of things. I'm grateful that I exist. I'm grateful that there are problems. I am grateful that I can strive. And as things become more properly basic, they can't be taken from you. As long as I live, there will always be certain things that are accessible to me, certain things that I can be grateful for. And if I make the thing that I'm grateful for and then I build value into, because again, value doesn't exist outside of my brain, never mind. If I make that my existence is a thing that I'm making meaningful and beautiful and something that I put value in, then that's something that can't be taken from me. And if it is, I won't be there for it. So, of course, I thought of it. That can be kind of painful. But today, I think it's so cool how you can know such wonderful ideas like this that's so helpful and special, and you can still just not do them. Like, you can still just suck at it and be an idiot and fail. And if anything, that's kind of cool in a way. It kind of shows the contingent nature of good things. There is nothing that matters at all until we do something about it. That's kind of... I would say there's a few things that are intrinsic, but the things that even have intrinsic value are ones that we assign to them, because, again, value exists in our minds. So I guess, yeah, I can say that. But I knew this process. I knew how it goes. I knew how to apply it. I've been practicing it. I would say that I'm a specialist of sort in the field of gratitude. It's been a tremendous benefit to me. But today I just wasn't willing or able. There was like a variety of reasons why I was failing to apply it, and I felt bitter. I don't know if it was that process of things coming into my life and leading this natural sort of process and me being bitter about that in part. I think what I can say is what I was bitter about had to do a lot with not how the world has to be, but how it happens to be. So we certainly live in a... I try to stay away from contemporary stuff because I think it's dated, and it's kind of sad to read of a really cool philosopher and then they get really caught up in like something in their time period and it doesn't really apply, or maybe proverbially, and that's on me for not reading into it. But I try to stay out of contemporary issues, and specifically ones that are divisive, because I'm not sure that I'm going to have good enough of something to say and substantive enough of something to say that it's going to be worth the people that are going to disagree with me and not be open to the more important things I have to say, which I really hope they will listen to. But I think I'm going to do that now a tiny bit by saying when I am and what the world looks like currently is a very peculiar time. There's been and I've been pretty open about my thoughts on this, a sort of runaway progressive move, and I'm not going to say what specific progresses are the ones that I do and don't like, because that can be divisive, and I really don't think it matters that much. But this idea that there has to be this progress towards something, and I think the one that I'm most open to complaining about, if I'm being honest, it's a complaint, is the technological. Like, I'm thoroughly worried for what the world will lead to. And you might say, well, we can build this utopia. The more that I think about it, even on like an a priori basis, I think it is nearly a necessary fact that utopias can exist because of what we are. You can build a society that's perfect according to this metric or that metric, but whether or not that metric is right for our organism is a different question. That was way better than I put that earlier. I should remember that. But the best example is me as an organism, and this is sort of a biological plea, but I think if there's anything that we're going to look at empirical, a nice basic biological plea is a nice fair one. Me as an organism is designed for a specific type of environment, and that's an environment where the food I'm eating is something that I'm evolved to eat, you know, berries and little fishes and insects and stuff. And I'm in a close-knit social group, and we're outside in an environment where it's hot, it's cold, we're uncomfortable, and there's definitely some meaning making in our lives, and maybe there's some mythos with it. We have this idea of the divine, and we come back after a long day of hunting and gathering to dance and sing. And I'm not going to romanticize it too much, but it's certainly one specific thing that we're designed for. And I'm not going to say that that's objectively better, but what I can to say is it is what I am made for. And the world that we've made for ourselves, because that's one of the things that we make ourselves special as humans. We say, well, we're the one species that changed our environment instead of ourselves. Obvious problem with that. How do we know that we are smart enough to choose our environment such that it won't be an issue? Because the disparity and the variance between what we are designed to live in and what we do live in causes a massive rift. It's sort of like the same idea as cognitive dissonance. If the world around you and your perception of the world is different enough, that can cause immense pain. And that's where I think the world's at. And where this paper on loneliness was getting at, this was, I think, this progression towards something that we don't know what it is, and we just want more and more, and we think it's better, but I think you'd have to make a case for me that I don't get yet. And those social entities, the families, the tribes that we're designed to be in just don't exist anymore. And I'm at fault for this because I'm a particularly solitary person, and I isolate myself, and so that's on me. However, in the attempts I have made to be a part of something socially and to make meaning with people, I failed. And to some degree, that's just a happenstance of my life and has nothing to do with the rest of the world. But I say in this paper, I think that perhaps the sociologist has something to say here, and the individual experience is somehow tied and connected to the larger social experience. And so this paper, I talk about how I reached out to people to get their insights on this, see if this was a larger issue. And this is a sort of hilarious, painful irony. No one responded. That's a lie. I guess one friend responded. Very few people responded. So I went, I'm not a huge fan of the academic, especially right now. They've been some type of fool over the last couple of years, but I went and looked into this for quite a while and found that there is an epidemic of loneliness. And they say that it's super bad for your health, equivalent to smoking 15 or 17 cigarettes a day. And then it pointed out how pervasive it is. So I'm sure that to a large degree, I assume responsibility for the loneliness that I feel in my life. However, people at large, and perhaps a large portion of what I have experienced, comes from this larger systemic issue. The problem, and this is why I don't like excuses or putting the pain outside of our control. Yes, you get to feel innocent for a minute and be like, oh, well, it's not my fault that I'm suffering. But then you immediately remove any opportunity to control that suffering, to mitigate it. And this powerlessness leads to a bitterness that it is pervasive and brutal and bitter and excuses some horrendous things. All of the worst people I have ever met that did the most terrible things always had a great excuse for why they did it. Something terrible happened to them. Something was unfair to them. And you know what? They were right in that thing was terrible. I've read about serial killers who talk about their childhood and how horrible it was. Those childhoods were terrible. But, of course, I think we could both agree, just right off the bat before I make a case for it, that it doesn't necessitate that one bring about more bitterness into the world. So, to some degree, I think that I am bitter, and will probably be a little bit bitter from here on out, although I will attempt to mitigate it and make a case that empowers my action to make the world and my life a better situation, as far as I see it. However, I forgot the however, dang. My mind's all over the place. I really should have meditated today. So where was I? So the bitterness. Mine just went blank. I actually feel kind of at peace right now. Not sure why. Feels good though. Feels like I just put down my problems. Just for a moment. I'm sure I'm gonna pick them up tomorrow and go through that same thing over again, but feels like I don't need them right now. I think a lot of my life I've carried pain unnecessarily because I wanted to validate how deeply I felt it. I wanted to affirm that fact and have the world see it. And I didn't necessarily want, like, oh, I'm sorry, buddy, that was so terrible. But I think we all kind of want someone to be like, I see that. That's rough. And so I think we carry more pain than we have to because we want someone to see it. We want to prove something. I don't think that's necessarily bad. I don't know if it's the best way of doing that, but what I do know is this. Right now I don't feel bitter. I think it's because I thought it through, and I don't think the human mind struggles to have problems, because it's, you know, I think it would struggle more to not have problems. I think what it struggles with is to think that it doesn't have a shot in fighting those problems. And I think that's why I write and talk to people and try to do any silly little thing that I can. Is because I want people to have the sense that they can respond to the terrible mess that is their life. I don't like to lie to people and say their lives are not messes, although sometimes I think we can all be a little dramatic, and I know that I'm personally guilty of that. But I would like for them to know that whatever that massive heaping pile of chaos and vitriol and hatred and violence and randomness and chaos and meaninglessness that is before them, perhaps there's something about their soul that only can climb it, but wants to. And I think it needs a way. What made me bitter today was a series of structural, technological, and ideological phenomenon, entities, that resulted in a sort of naysaying to life. That made the human experience something that was told no. In its pain, in its honesty, in its authenticity. And I think that's why I'm angry. But I think the anger faded Not because I don't think that people are doing that and the world happens to be doing that. I don't think, it's all intentional. But because I think I know it's not true. And I think that I also know that nobody can convince me otherwise that I can't say yes to life, to being alive, to being a human. Now, there's not reasons to want to say no. I think there's a strong case to be made. But when it's all said and done, I think I will continue to be as bitter as I need to from day to day. I'll be as concerned about issues as I think is appropriate. And I will suffer a good, honest suffering. But every single bit of that will be with this honest, sincere, and authentic yes to life. Live deliberately. Esse Maxim.